Hey there, welcome back to the channel, the place where royal history gets peeled back like never before. Today, we're diving into something that sounds almost too twisted to be true. Imagine a queen so obsessed with power, so unwilling to let go of her throne, that she did the unthinkable. She didn't just rule behind closed doors. She changed the rules of morality, tradition, and nature itself, all to keep her grip on the crown. A royal scandal so disturbing, most historians tried to bury it under layers of polite euphemism, but not today. Get comfortable, but brace yourself, because the story you're about to hear will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about royalty, motherhood, and the cost of absolute power. She was born into a crumbling empire, in a palace where every golden wall echoed with whispers of betrayal, desperation, and dying legacy. From the moment her eyes opened to the glare of chandeliers, she knew that power was never truly inherited, it was taken. Her name was Queen Aurelia of the Varnava dynasty, a royal house so ancient and shrouded in mystery that even the official historians tread carefully around its archives. She wasn't supposed to be the queen, she wasn't even supposed to be remembered. But fate, and a perfectly timed family tragedy, catapulted her into a role that would define an entire century of whispers, scandals, and shadows. At the age of 17, she was wed to her cousin, Prince Wenzel, in a desperate move to preserve the bloodline. The union was cold, calculated, and almost entirely ceremonial. Wenzel was a passive man, more interested in astronomy and mirrors than ruling a nation. And while he buried himself in telescopes and spiritualism, Aurelia watched, learned, and quietly orchestrated her ascent. Within 5 years, the palace belonged to her. Not officially, on paper, Wenzel still wore the crown, but behind every royal decree, behind every military maneuver and court appointment, stood the cunning hand of Queen Aurelia. Then came the plague. It swept through the countryside like a biblical curse, and within months, the royal family was decimated. Wenzel succumbed to fever, leaving Aurelia a widow at 23 with a single child, her 5-year-old son, Prince Ilias. The court mourned, the church held vigils, and Aurelia, she tightened her grip. Widowed queens were often married off again, traded like diplomatic playing cards to foreign powers, but Aurelia refused. She declared her son the heir and herself his regent. A regency that, by tradition, would last only until he turned 18. But Queen Aurelia had other plans. For the next decade, the kingdom existed in a strange, quiet obedience. Publicly, the Queen Mother was admired, beloved even. She was the Iron Widow who had steered the ship through plague, rebellion, and drought, but behind the palace doors, unease grew. Her advisors noticed that Prince Ilias, though intelligent and articulate, rarely spoke without glancing at his mother. He showed no interest in marriage, rarely left the castle, and was always flanked by his mother during state functions, not beside her, but slightly behind, like a shadow trying to mimic the sun. By the time he turned 18, there was expectation in the air, whispers of coronation, of freedom, of the boy finally stepping into his father's shoes, but the announcement never came. Instead, a royal decree was issued stating that, due to unprecedented national vulnerability, the regency would be extended indefinitely. No one dared protest it openly, not the clergy, not the ministers, not even the prince himself. Because by now, everyone understood Aurelia wasn't just the queen regent, she was the throne. But then, the rumors began. It started with servants. A handmaiden reported seeing the queen and the prince dining alone, behind locked doors. Long past midnight, a court musician claimed he saw the queen brushing Ilias's hair by the fireplace, not like a mother, but like a lover. The palace dismissed the claims as hallucinations born from fever, but the rumors had already taken root. And rumors, like rot, never stay hidden for long. One summer night, a sealed letter arrived at the archbishop's residence. It bore the queen's seal and was marked with the highest level of secrecy. The content of that letter would never be made public, but what followed was unprecedented. The archbishop left the capital under cover of darkness and traveled to the palace, where he remained secluded with the queen and the prince for 3 days. When he emerged, he looked visibly aged, and when asked what had occurred inside, he simply muttered, "History will not forgive us." 2 weeks later, the royal court gathered for a sacred ceremony, one not seen in generations. The official statement claimed that it was a dynastic reaffirmation, but those who were there they knew better. The queen entered the chapel not in mourning black, but in ceremonial ivory. The prince stood beside her, pale and blank-eyed. The rings exchanged were not those of royal heirs or state contracts, but wedding bands. The queen had married her son. Not figuratively, not as a symbolic gesture. A full religious ceremony was conducted. The marriage was consummated, according to palace rumor, that very night, though none dared to say it out loud. The royal scribe who penned the official record was found dead in his chambers a week later, his manuscript missing and his body bruised with signs of torture. His replacement, a quiet monk named Fadric, rewrote the record with flowery language and thick metaphor, a text so vague that future scholars would be left scratching their heads, unsure if it was describing a wedding or a coronation. But inside the palace, everyone knew the truth. And the queen, she never looked back. She ruled beside Ilias not as his mother, but as his wife. A bizarre co-rulership emerged, where decisions were signed jointly, Aurelia and Ilias, but it was always her signature that came first. Ilias began to withdraw further, reportedly suffering from insomnia, tremors, and hallucinations. Physicians diagnosed him with a fragile spirit. Others whispered darker theories, that he had gone mad from guilt, or that he had never wanted this at all. There was no heir. For 20 years, the throne remained childless, the queen claimed. That divine intervention had deemed the royal blood too sacred to dilute with ordinary life. The people, confused and horrified, either left the kingdom or fell into silence. The church, originally complicit, distanced itself. Foreign monarchs refused to visit. The dynasty, once the most respected in Eastern realms, became the subject of grotesque songs and dark theater across Europe. Children played games pretending to be the mother bride or the cursed prince. And still, within the palace gates, Queen Aurelia ruled unbothered, untouched. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the reign ended. On the morning of the winter solstice, Ilias was found dead in the royal garden, face down in a frozen pond. The queen claimed it was suicide. Her voice was calm as she announced it to the court. No tears, no trembling. Just quiet conviction, and that's where things only got darker. The death of Prince Ilias sent a chill far colder than the winter frost that covered the kingdom that morning. It wasn't simply the loss of a monarch in name, but the sudden removal of the only other human being who had shared Queen Aurelia's isolated throne. No autopsy was permitted. No burial procession was allowed. The queen declared that his body would be sealed in the Hall of Silence, an ancient vault beneath the palace used centuries ago for saints and martyrs. The chamber was reopened with sacred chants and guarded night and day by soldiers, who answered only to Aurelia herself. There was no public mourning. No statues erected. No portrait painted. It was as if the prince had never existed, but Aurelia. She continued to rule, now alone and more visibly than ever. Dressed always in black and white, the mourning of a widow, the purity of a bride, she walked the corridors of the palace in absolute command. Ministers bowed deeper, nobles whispered softer, and those who dared to question her authority either disappeared or returned with vacant eyes and trembling hands. Outside the palace, the people speculated endlessly. Some believed she had killed him, others insisted that he had drowned himself out of despair, broken finally by the unnatural bond forced upon him. But the darkest theory, the one even whispered in corners of the church, was that Ilias had tried to run. That he had attempted to flee the palace in the cover of night, and someone, perhaps even the queen herself, had stopped him. Permanently. One of the only surviving pieces of evidence came from an anonymous letter, smuggled out of the royal kitchen by a former servant and delivered to a traveling monk. The monk, terrified by its content, passed it along to a local bishop, who copied it before it was mysteriously stolen. The letter read, "He wept every night, not like a man, but like a boy." She kissed his face with lips cold as coins and said, "You are mine," and when he tried to leave, she whispered, "Then we both must die," but only he did. After Ilias's death, the kingdom entered what would later be called the era of the cloaked crown. For nearly 12 years, Queen Aurelia ruled as sole sovereign. But she did not appoint an heir, nor did she permit court marriages, fearing new dynasties might rise. She increased surveillance across noble houses, banned foreign literature, and dissolved the Council of Dukes, the same council that had once protected the succession laws of the crown. It was clear there would be no future but hers, but time, as always, crept in. By her early 60s, signs of Aurelia's decline became visible. Her gait slowed, her voice, once commanding, became thin and rasping. But her mind remained razor sharp. She began to retreat from the public eye, rarely leaving her chambers. And yet, disturbing reports began to emerge, whispers of voices echoing from behind her locked doors, of candlelight flickering through her windows well past midnight, and of two shadows dancing across the chamber floor when only one person was supposedly inside. Some believed she had gone mad. Others believed she was performing rituals, calling upon ancient powers to restore her youth or summon her lost son from the afterlife. Whatever the truth was, no one dared ask. One day, a new figure appeared in the palace, a young man, no older than 20, with pale eyes and golden hair, was seen walking the halls beside the queen. He was dressed in royal garments, but bore no title. He never spoke to anyone, never attended court. But he dined with the queen, strolled with her in the garden, and once, just once, was seen weeping quietly while she caressed his hair. The court, already trembling under her reign, dared not question it. Then came the portraits. A series of paintings were commissioned, for in total, each depicting the queen and the young man seated together, eerily reminiscent of earlier portraits of her and Prince Ilias. The resemblance was uncanny, the same angular jaw, the same vacant stare, the same distant sadness. Some whispered that the boy was Ilias's illegitimate son, born in secret and raised in isolation. Others believed something even worse, that Aurelia had found a peasant boy, similar in appearance, and was trying to relive her unnatural union. Desperate to regain what time had stolen. It was during this period that the kingdom's records became fractured. Entire volumes from the royal archive disappeared. Letters were burned, diaries destroyed. Chroniclers were imprisoned or executed for seditious misrepresentation. It was as if Aurelia had begun erasing her own past, or rewriting it. Detail by manipulated detail, statues of Prince Ilias were removed. His name vanished from schoolbooks. Even church sermons were ordered to omit mention of his reign. The memory of him was being buried deeper than his body ever had been, but secrets never stay buried. On the eve of the queen's 73rd birthday, lightning struck the eastern tower of the palace, igniting a fire that quickly spread through the archive wing. Though most of the flames were contained, several sealed vaults were broken open in the chaos, among them the Hall of Silence. When the guards rushed down to inspect, they found something horrifying. Inside the crypt, beside the stone coffin of Prince Ilias, were traces of blood and shattered chains. The coffin itself was empty. The next morning, the queen collapsed during a private audience with her confessor. She was rushed to her chamber, but refused medical help. Her only demand was that the young man, the boy with pale eyes, be brought to her. He was seen entering her chambers. He was never seen again. 3 days later, Queen Aurelia was declared dead. The official cause, natural exhaustion. But the truth was far more disturbing. When the royal undertakers opened her chamber to prepare her body for burial, they found something chilling. The queen's body was lying in her bed, dressed in the same ivory gown she had worn on her wedding night to Ilias. Her hands were clutching a lock of golden hair. Her eyes were open, fixed on the ceiling, and carved into the stone above her bed, using what appeared to be a blade, were the words, "Mine in life, mine in death." No announcement was made to the public. The palace issued a vague statement about the passing of a sovereign after years of noble service. No funeral was held. Her body was cremated immediately, her ashes scattered over the royal lake, the same lake where Ilias had died, and with her death, the Varnava dynasty ended. No heir was named. No successor rose, the kingdom dissolved into fragmented provinces, later absorbed by neighboring empires, but the story refused to die. For decades, travelers claimed to see a pale boy wandering the palace ruins, calling out for his mother. Others swore they heard wedding bells in the wind or saw a figure in ivory standing by the lake, her face half in shadow, waiting. For someone who could never return, the queen who married her own son became more than just a taboo tale. She became a myth, a warning, a curse spoken in royal households and whispered by servants, the story of a woman who broke every rule of God and man to keep her power, and in doing so, lost everything but her legend. In the years following Queen Aurelia's death, the royal palace of Varnava became something of a cursed relic, a decaying monument to the scandal that had unraveled the last threads of a once great empire. Nature began reclaiming its hold. Ivy strangled the towers, marble halls grew cold and cracked, and the great iron gates that had once symbolized unshakable authority rusted shut with time. No ruler came to claim the throne, no noble dared step foot within its haunted walls. The dynasty was over, and with it vanished the last remnants of a family that had ruled with secrets far darker than any battlefield. But of course, legends never die so easily. In a dusty monastery on the kingdom's northern border, a forbidden journal surfaced in the private collection of a disgraced monk named Alaric. It bore no author's name but was filled with first-hand accounts of court life during the final decade of Aurelia's rule. The entries were terrifyingly specific, disturbingly intimate, notes about the queen's sleeping habits, Ilias's erratic behavior, and even mention of the night the mirror cracked. But the most shocking entry read, "She calls him by two names now, husband and son, and sometimes, when the candles are low, she forgets which one he is." The journal was immediately confiscated and declared heretical. But copies had already been made and circulated in secret. Scholars tried to dismiss it as fiction, propaganda, but the details, the specificity, the psychological insight, it was too real. And once the veil was lifted, people started looking deeper. Letters were found, hidden in the hollow spine of a bookshelf in the royal library. All addressed to my dearest I, all written in the same delicate, flowing hand. The tone was intimate, obsessive, and strangely possessive. Phrases like "your scent lingers on my robes," and "when you sleep beside me, the kingdom is whole again" revealed a woman unhinged by grief, control, and a perversion of love. Historians hesitated to even translate them fully. They weren't state documents. They were the inner confessions of a woman who had blurred the line between motherhood, monarchy, and madness. But what truly cemented Aurelia's legacy as more than just a scandal was the discovery beneath the east wing of the palace. Nearly 60 years after her death, during a failed renovation project by the occupying government, construction workers unearthed a sealed chamber behind the fireplace in the queen's private chamber. What they found inside defied belief. The chamber was small and circular, with walls lined in black velvet and faint remnants of dried roses. At the center stood a bed, not a grand royal bed, but a simple cot draped in faded white silk. Above it hung a portrait, a copy of the wedding painting, but altered. In this version, Ilias's expression was blank, his eyes sunken and gray, while Aurelia's face wore a serene smile that felt anything but maternal. But what chilled the workers most wasn't the painting. It was the skeleton lying on the bed. Human remains, clearly adult, male, the bones bore signs of restraint. Thin iron cuffs still dangled from the wrists and ankles. The jawbone was cracked, one rib was broken. Nearby lay an ornate silver chalice filled with long-dried blood. And clutched in the skeletal hand was a piece of torn parchment, bearing a single sentence in what appeared to be Ilias's handwriting. "I was never yours." That discovery turned speculation into horror. Was this the real fate of the prince? Had his death in the lake been staged? a cover for something far worse? Had Aurelia imprisoned him, kept him locked away, drugged, manipulated, perhaps, even killed in that very bed, theories spiraled. Perhaps she had faked his public rule for years, using a double or forging his signatures. Perhaps she had staged the wedding for appearances while keeping the real Ilias hidden, bound in that secret room, replaying her fantasy of love and control day after day. It was no longer merely disturbing, it was grotesque, but the truly terrifying question remained. Why? Some historians argued that Aurelia had suffered from a severe form of psychosis brought on by early trauma, power obsession, and chronic isolation. Others believed she had inherited what was known in some medical circles as blood madness, a term whispered through the generations of inbred nobility, describing those whose desire to preserve royal purity consumed their grip on reality. Yet, others suggested something darker still, not madness, but method, that Aurelia had known exactly what she was doing. That her love for her son wasn't confusion, but strategy. In a court filled with backstabbing dukes and jealous cousins, no ally could be trusted. But a child could be raised to adore her, obey her, and if that child were never allowed to grow out of her shadow, if he were bound not just by blood but by marital vow, then she would never lose her grip on power. She had created a king in her image, and when he threatened to break free, she broke him first. The horror of it all was not that a mother married her son. It was that she had planned it, that she had shaped his entire life from the moment he was born to serve her obsession. Power, yes, but also something more primal, the need to be the only one, the only voice, the only touch. The only God he would ever know. The monarchy had long taught that rulers were divine, that bloodlines were sacred. But Aurelia took that belief and twisted it into a doctrine of isolation and domination. She didn't just preserve the dynasty, she became it. Her womb gave birth to the heir, her arms crowned a king, and her lips took his last breath, and after her death, the land never truly recovered. Civil wars broke out in the neighboring regions. The church, shamed by its early support of the queen's actions, fractured into 3 splinter sects. Neighboring kingdoms refused to acknowledge the Varnava lineage in diplomatic archives, choosing instead to pretend it had ended a generation earlier. The palace, looted and abandoned, became a place where no one dared to live. Children who wandered to close claimed to hear singing inside, a lullaby in a woman's voice, followed by a young man's scream. One famous folklorist who visited the ruins wrote in his journal, "The walls still breathe with their madness. The bed smells of rose and rot. And at night, I swear I saw her, a woman in white, dancing with a man who wasn't there." Even today, the legacy of Queen Aurelia lingers not in textbooks, but in ghost stories, in every tale of a cursed kingdom, a mad queen, or a love so consuming it eats its own flesh. She is there, unnamed but unmistakable. Her story is whispered not for entertainment, but as a warning, because history isn't just about dates and battles. Sometimes it's about the monsters we become when no one dares to stop us. About what happens when love turns inward, when power consumes all relationships, even the sacred bond of mother and child. She ruled an empire. She married her son, she outlived everyone, but in the end, the world remembered not her victories, not her policies, not even her reign, only the silence that followed. The final chapter of Queen Aurelia's life didn't end with her death, it began there. For most monarchs, death is the closing of a legacy. Statues are erected, cities renamed, history sealed in ink. But for Aurelia, death merely unlatched the gates of myth. And what stepped through was something that neither time nor truth could erase. In the decades that followed, whispers of the mother bride spread like wildfire across the continent. Not through official chronicles or court historians, but in lullabies twisted into nightmares, in parables meant to frighten children into obedience, and in the increasingly obscure pages of outlawed books. There were stories of a queen who kissed her infant prince on the lips and said, "One day, you'll wear my crown and my ring," of a son who was told from his crib that the only woman worthy of his love was the one who had birthed him. and of a palace that smelled forever of wilted roses and cold ashes. In many ways, the truth behind Aurelia's life became harder to trace precisely because so many versions of it emerged. One painting discovered in a private collection in Hallstein showed the queen breastfeeding a child far too old for such intimacy, their eyes locked in an expression that stirred discomfort rather than affection. The artist's name was unknown, and the canvas was unsigned, but the back bore a single sentence in charcoal: "I painted what I saw." Other fragments emerged, a shredded love letter hidden in the spine of a children's book, allegedly written by Ilias in trembling Latin, begging anyone to help him escape. An old music box recovered from beneath the ruins of the queen's chamber that played not a lullaby, but a haunting waltz titled Forever Mine, with no known composer. And the most shocking of all, a preserved medical record written in code, decrypted only a century later, indicating that a royal physician had been ordered to prescribe the prince chemical restraints for romantic confusion, with dosages increasing monthly under the queen's signature. Yet none of this made it into official history. Instead, what filled the vacuum was folklore. Rural plays performed by masked actors portrayed Aurelia as a witch who bathed in her son's blood to preserve her youth. A tragic opera named Ivory and Iron turned her tale into an epic of doomed love and divine punishment, where heaven weeps as a mother dances with her son on a burning throne. Even priests began to use her name in sermons, not as a monarch, but as a symbol of sin so vast it warped the natural order. But the strange thing is, not all depictions of Aurelia were entirely damning. In some circles, especially among radical thinkers and fringe historians, she became a subject of morbid fascination. A woman who defied every law, moral, religious, political, and did so with complete conviction. To them, she was not a queen who lost her sanity, but one who saw the game of power for what it truly was: a brutal, blood-soaked struggle where tradition was just a mask and love, when twisted correctly, could become the ultimate weapon. They pointed out how Aurelia, in the face of impossible odds, the plague, the death of her husband, the crumbling of dynastic alliances, had maintained absolute control. How she single-handedly preserved her kingdom's stability for decades, while others fell to rebellion. And how, in a court where women were often used as bargaining chips, she had taken control of her destiny in the most extreme way imaginable. But even her most sympathetic interpreters could not defend the way she used her son, for in the end, no matter how strategic, how clever, or how brutal her reign had been, it was built on the breaking of one man's will. A child raised not with love, but with possession. A prince trained not to rule, but to orbit her. His voice erased, his identity consumed, his death unresolved, and while the kingdom crumbled into history, his ghost remained, literally, in some cases. Travelers to the ruins of the Varnava Palace often claimed to feel sudden chills, even in summer. Tour guides stopped offering night tour after too many reported hearing soft footsteps behind them or voices whispering in an empty room. One visitor, a poet from the West, claimed that while walking through the queen's chamber, she felt someone touch her cheek and whisper, "Don't become her." In 1943, a team of researchers filming a historical documentary captured a blurry image near the old nursery wing. A shadowy figure seated in the window, motionless, had bowed. The footage was dismissed as a camera glitch until an archivist reviewing old blueprints pointed out that the window in question was bricked shut over a century earlier. The figure, she said, was seated on what used to be the prince's childhood bed. But perhaps the most disturbing revelation came not from ghosts or letters, but from within the bloodline itself. In the early 2000s, a genetic study was conducted on the remains of the Varnava nobility buried in the southern catacombs. One body, previously unclassified, was found to have unusual chromosomal patterns suggesting inbreeding levels higher than any recorded among European royalty. DNA matched both maternal and paternal markers from the Aurelia line. This body, remarkably well preserved, was estimated to have died in his early 20s. Historians now believe it may have been a child born in secret between Aurelia and Ilias. A child who was never spoken of, never acknowledged, and perhaps never allowed to live past infancy. The implications of that finding shattered the last illusions of myth. This wasn't just a story of obsession or control. It may have also been a story of incestuous lineage, one quietly buried by a queen who, in her final years, could no longer distinguish love from legacy. In the modern world, the story of Queen Aurelia lives on, not in the annals of official history, but in the shadows between truth and tale. Students of royal history whisper about her in dim library corners. Filmmakers attempt, and often abandon, projects based on her life, citing emotional toll or creative paralysis, and online forums dedicated to historical conspiracies debate every detail. Was Ilias real or a fabrication? Was the son she married the same child she raised? Was there a secret successor? And most importantly, why was she never stopped? Because perhaps that's what haunts us most about Queen Aurelia's legacy. Not just the taboo, the scandal, the maternal betrayal, but the silence, the complicity of those around her. The court that bowed, the church that blessed, the ministers who wrote the laws she dictated. It wasn't just her madness that ruled. It was everyone's fear of confronting it. And so she remains, perched on the edge of history, neither fully condemned nor fully forgotten. A queen who loved tyrannically, ruled too long, and left behind a legacy soaked not in glory, but in whispers. Even now, when the wind howls across the abandoned grounds of the Varnhaber estate, locals say you can hear music from the old ballroom. A waltz with only two dancers, spinning forever in the dark, one in ivory, one in silence, and together they dance, mother and son, queen and king, bride and groom, the cursed lovers history tried to erase, but never could.